Hello, everybody, and welcome back. My name is Aaron the Sloth, and in this episode, we're going to be diving deep into setting up your lab's firewall. We'll be using pfSense in Oracle VirtualBox, and this will be our perimeter device that interconnects our virtual network to the internet. If you missed the previous episode, all we went over was kind of the basics of VirtualBox, the basics configuration, what you need, and things like that. So be sure to check that out if you're interested in kind of learning synopsis of this all. So let's kind of start with breaking down what pfSense is. pfSense is a free open source firewall slash router solution based on FreeBSD. It's super popular for home labs because it's powerful, lightweight, and gives you full control over your network traffic. So we're going to be using this as our lab's gateway. Everything inside the lab will connect through pfSense in order to get out to the internet. To start, all we need to do is download the pfSense ISO off of pfSense.org. So here we have pfSense.org. Let's go ahead and head to download. We should be good to go ahead and download the latest stable version. Go ahead and click on download. And here for the image, we want to select the AMD ISO and click add to cart. You'll need to make an account, so I've went ahead and already made my account because I've already downloaded the Netgate installer. Obviously, no payment is required because it's $0. Now we're going to go ahead and hit download now. I'm going to go ahead and put this in my A drive, and I've created this lab series folder where I'm going to be putting everything that we do within our lab. We're going to open up the archive and we're going to drag the ISO out. Now that we have our ISO, this is essentially what we're going to be using in order to create the pfSense VM. And that's all you need to do for step one, which I actually already have the ISO right here. With my other OS backups, I've decided to put them in my E drive. I just want to show you guys how you would go about actually downloading it onto your system and extracting the file into a specific location of your choice. So I'm actually going to go back here and delete those because I don't need them. I've already got. But I have went ahead and removed all of my previous virtual machines because I want to build this from scratch to show you guys how easy it is to do. And also, just to be perfectly candid, this is still my first take on all of this. So forgive me if it seems a little off. All right, so let's start with building out the virtual machine. So what do we want to name it? I'm going to go with FirewallIn 001 just to maintain that standard that I showed you guys yesterday with my Miro board. Select the folder where you want your virtual machine to be placed at. Note this will use up the storage of whatever particular drive you throw this into. So we're going to go and select the A drive and put it in the lab series folder. Now we select the ISO image. So here I've got it on my E drive under the servers folder within OS backups and then the Netgate installer ISO. Next we want to make sure that we set the type to BSD, subtype FreeBSD 64-bit. Note this has no requirement to select the unattended installation. So we don't have to worry about it auto creating the user administrator or just any user on the machine by default. Hardware, and this is why I say you definitely want as much RAM and a CPU with as many cores as possible because this is where the system resources are selected. Here we can see we only have about 1 GB of RAM, and 1 core. This is fine for default. If you want more, feel free to include more. Just know that it will limit your memory and processors for your other VMs that you will be running. And ultimately, what we will have running is we will have a DC running, a Windows client running, our pfSense firewall running, and our SIEM running. Also, what you're more than willing to do is have your own Miro board up. Miro is free to use. You can have up to 3 boards per user within the free variant. So there's no need to pay for Miro or upgrade it unless you want to. But as you can see, we will have our pfSense firewall open, our SIEM open, our DC open, and a Windows client and a Linux client. So you will be having multiple machines running at once. At base, you will definitely need to have 4 running at a time. There's no need to have both a Linux client and a Windows client up at the same time. So kind of notate how much system resources you're going to be using all at once. You can also open up your task manager just to keep tabs on how much system resources are being utilized. As you can see, we're not even using 1 gig of RAM yet, so there's no cause for concern. I'm going to go ahead and leave it at the default 1 gigabyte of RAM and 1 CPU being used. The default value for your hard drive is going to be about 16 gigs. That should be plenty for our firewall since it won't be storing data itself. It'll mostly just be used as a service on its own. Since it's essentially its own standalone machine, there's not really going to be anything on it besides the software of pfSense. Other than that, you're not really going to have a whole lot of storage need. So 16 gigs should be plenty. We can up it if we need to and then reallocate data as needed, but I say we should just stick to 16 gigabytes. If we run into system issues like bottlenecking, we can always recreate the device. That's the good part about going at these things one at a time. We can do limit testing and then just kind of go from there. But now that we're done with the configuration, let's go ahead and hit finish. Now that we have the system created, we're going to go into the settings and we're going to go down to network. And here we want to make sure that we have 2 network adapters enabled. This is so that we have our bridge adapter or our NAT adapter set up for external connections. This basically means that the firewall is going to be connected to the internet, or rather my host machine's internet. And then adapter 2 is going to be our internal network. We'll go and call this LabNet. Set promiscuous mode to allow all, and that's it. So now we have 2 connections for the firewall essentially enabled. We have external connectivity and internal connectivity. This is essentially so that every other VM that we create, we're only going to connect it to the firewall, and that will give all the internal VMs access to the internet. That way all traffic is logged in the firewall so that when we set up our SIEM, all logs will be forwarded to the SIEM for review and alerting. So now let's boot it up and let's install the software. We'll basically be using all of the default setup. There's no real need for us to configure anything beyond that except install pfSense. So EM0 is going to be our bridged or our NAT adapter. Continue. And then now we want to assign the LAN interface. That is going to be EM1. LAN as in local access network. That is going to be our internal LabNet. Now it's going to be verifying the internet connection, making sure that the pfSense firewall can connect out to the internet. Note that this device obviously doesn't have the pfSense Plus subscription. That's fine. We're just going to be installing the CE software or the Community Edition software. So continue. Okay. Everything is pretty much default. And on this step, it's asking us to confirm if we want to format the drive, which yes, we do. Just like any other VM that we're going to be creating, it's always going to ask us if we're wanting to format this one specific drive. So just go ahead and hit yes. Current stable release, and it's installing. Also note that once this is done installing, we want to unmount that ISO so that it doesn't go through the boot up, setup, installation process all over again. Now it's done, we're actually going to power off the machine, come back here to storage, and we will remove attachment. Okay, there it goes. It's being weird. It wouldn't let me remove it for a second. Not sure why, but we can confirm it here in storage. It only has the controller IDE pointed right at that firewall lin001.vdi file. So now it's just doing its initialization and it should boot up as we expect. Okay, so now we have all our interfaces assigned, and as you can tell, we have our LAN currently set to the default value of 192.168.1.1 with a subnet of 24. In our mirror diagram, we currently show that we want to set it up as 192.168.10.1. That's just to kind of simulate what you would anticipate in a real world environment. It's not going to have the default value of an internal IP, so we kind of want to give it our own internal value. In a typical environment, you want to customize and set up so that you know what IP addresses are mapped to what devices. Kind of just helps with inventory of everything. So we're going to go to option 2 where we can set interface IP addresses. Oh, my bad. My number lock was off. Let's configure that. Do you want to configure it via DHCP? Nope. 192.168.10.1, 24, enter, and sure. Do DHCP 6 or IPv6 DHCP. Do you want to enable? Not really. Within our lab environment, I'm going to keep the web configurator protocol set to HTTP. So now we see that the IPv4 LAN address has been properly set to 192.168.10.1.24. And we're also making sure that IPv6 is set up to use DHCP6. which again, we don't need DHCP right now. We can set that up later. So now once we get around to actually deploying a client device, we will be able to connect directly to the pfSense firewall to configure firewall rules. Once we just do HTTP slash colon slash slash 192.168.10.1. And we can do that from any VM within the lab net. And basically that's all that you need to do to deploy a pfSense firewall. This subnet will serve as the foundation for our upcoming domain controller, DNS setup, and lab machines. We will continue to configure the firewall once we get around to it, but for now we're going to continue deploying virtual machines and lab environment. In the next episode, we'll be deploying a Windows Server 2019 virtual machine. Join it to the LabNet and promote it to a domain controller. So, thank you all so much for watching. If this helped you out, hit that like button, subscribe for the next episode, and drop any questions in the comments. All links and steps are in the video description and will also be posted on my GitHub site. So again, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you all in the next episode.